The city of New York was just beginning to wake as the first rays of dawn painted the skyline with hues of gold and pink. The streets were already buzzing with life, cars honking, pedestrians hurrying to work, and vendors setting up their stalls. It was an ordinary morning for most, but for Detective Chloe Moore, today was about to take a turn she never expected. Chloe, a seasoned officer known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice, stood near a coffee shop on Fifth Avenue, casually sipping her coffee as she scanned the busy streets. Her morning routine was always the same, a quiet moment before diving into the chaos of her job. But today, chaos found her first. Out of nowhere, a large German shepherd came barreling through the crowd, dodging pedestrians and sprinting straight toward her. Chloe barely had time to react before the dog, wearing a worn but official-looking service harness, latched onto her pant leg, tugging with an urgency that sent alarms through her mind. The dog's deep brown eyes were wild with desperation, its ears perked and tail wagging, but not in excitement. This was something different. "Hey there, buddy. What's wrong?" Chloe crouched slightly, reaching out cautiously. Instead of calming down, the dog, Duke, barked sharply, pulling harder at her pants before letting go and taking a few quick steps forward, turning back to her as if urging her to follow. Chloe's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a lost pet. This was a trained dog, and it was trying to lead her somewhere. Pedestrians stopped to watch, some chuckling at the sight of an officer being abducted by a dog. But Chloe knew better than to dismiss what her gut was telling her. She flicked her coffee cup into the trash, signaled to her partner in the patrol car, and jogged after Duke, her senses on high alert. Detective Chloe Moore followed Duke through the maze of narrow alleyways, her senses razor-sharp as the city's familiar noise faded into an eerie silence. The way Duke moved, focused, determined, made it clear this was no ordinary lost pet. This was a highly trained service dog, and it was leading her toward something important. The morning air was crisp, but Chloe felt a bead of sweat roll down her temple. Something about this didn't sit right. The urgency in Duke's movements, the way it constantly looked back to make sure she was following, it all screamed emergency. As they rounded a corner, Duke suddenly stopped dead in its tracks, ears perked, nose twitching. Chloe followed its gaze and immediately noticed something unusual. A beat-up old cargo van parked haphazardly near a row of abandoned buildings. The doors were slightly ajar, and from inside she could hear faint rustling, almost like movement. Chloe's heart rate quickened. Years of experience told her this could be anything. A runaway, an illegal operation, or something much worse. Slowly, she approached the van, one hand instinctively hovering near her holster. Duke let out a low, warning growl, as if sensing the tension thickening in the air. "Hello?" Chloe called out, keeping her voice firm but calm. "NYPD. If someone's in there, I need you to come out." Silence. Then, a sound. Faint. A whimper. Chloe's stomach tightened. It wasn't an adult, it was a child. Her hand shot to the van's handle, pulling the door open in one swift motion. Inside, her breath hitched. A young boy, no older than 8, sat curled up in the corner, his wrists loosely bound, his wide, tear-filled eyes locking onto hers in sheer terror. Chloe immediately knelt down, keeping her movements slow. "Hey there, kiddo. You're safe now. My name's Chloe. Can you tell me your name?" The boy hesitated, his small body trembling. Timothy, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Duke, as if sensing his distress, crawled closer and gently nudged the boy's knee with its snout. Timothy flinched at first, but as his gaze met the dog's warm, trusting eyes, he let out a shaky breath and slowly reached out, fingers brushing against Duke's fur. It was the first sign of comfort he had shown. Chloe's mind raced. How did he get here? Who left him? And more importantly, were they coming back? Before she could ask, Duke stiffened, its ears twitching toward something behind them. Chloe followed its gaze and froze. From a distance, parked across the street, a black sedan with tinted windows sat idling. The driver's silhouette was barely visible, but she could tell they were watching. Then, in an instant, the engine revved, and the car peeled away, tires screeching against the asphalt. Whoever had put Timothy in that van had just realized he wasn't there anymore. Chloe's instincts screamed at her to chase, but Timothy was her priority now. They could track the vehicle later. Right now, she needed to get the boy somewhere safe. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Moore. I have a child, 8 years old, male, found alone in an abandoned vehicle. Suspect vehicle just fled the scene. I need immediate backup and an ambulance on standby." "Copy that, Detective. Units are en route." Chloe turned back to Timothy, offering him her warmest, most reassuring smile. "We're gonna get you out of here, buddy. You're not alone anymore." As she gently lifted him out of the van, Timothy held on to Duke's harness tightly, as if the dog was the only thing keeping him grounded. And Chloe knew this was just the beginning. Detective Chloe Moore tightened her grip around Timothy Wright as she carried him away from the abandoned van. The boy clung to Duke's harness, his tiny fingers gripping the fabric as if letting go meant slipping back into the nightmare he had just escaped. The moment was fleeting. Chloe's mind was already racing, piecing together the puzzle. Why had Timothy been left there? Who was watching them? And why did they flee the moment she found him? But before she could fully process it, Duke let out a sudden guttural growl, a deep warning sound that sent shivers down Chloe's spine. The highly trained dog had sensed something, and it wasn't good. Then, a noise, footsteps, rapid, approaching. Chloe spun around just in time to see a figure darting out from behind a dumpster, moving fast, their face obscured by a hood. They weren't running away. They were running toward her. Instinct took over. Chloe shifted Timothy behind her, her free hand snapping to the holster at her hip. "Stop right there," she commanded, voice sharp, unwavering, but the figure didn't stop. They lunged. Chloe barely had time to react before Duke sprang into action. The dog launched forward with precision, knocking the attacker off balance before they could get too close. The impact sent the hooded figure stumbling backward, crashing against the alley wall. In a blur of motion, Chloe secured Timothy behind a stack of crates before closing the distance between her and the suspect. "Who sent you?" she demanded, pinning them in place. The person thrashed, trying to break free. "You have no idea what you just stepped into," they hissed, voice muffled by the fabric covering their face. "Enlighten me," Chloe shot back. Before she could get an answer, a deafening screech of tires ripped through the air. Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs as her eyes darted toward the street. The black sedan was back, and this time, it wasn't idling. It was speeding straight for them. "Move!" Chloe shouted, barely managing to yank Timothy into her arms before diving out of the way. The car missed them by inches, but in its wake, the hooded suspect used the chaos to break free, vanishing into the labyrinth of alleyways before Chloe could react. Duke barked furiously, wanting to give chase, but Chloe held up a hand. "No, buddy. We stay with the kid." The sedan didn't stop. It tore down the street, disappearing just as quickly as it had come. Chloe exhaled sharply, adrenaline still surging through her veins. This wasn't random. This was organized. Whoever had taken Timothy wanted him back badly enough to send a car barreling through a public space in broad daylight. "Detective Moore, status report?" Her radio crackled to life. She pressed the button, keeping her voice steady. "Suspect fled the scene. Child is secure, but we need an immediate escort. Whoever we're dealing with isn't backing down." "Copy that. Units are 2 minutes out." Timothy buried his face against Duke's side, his small body shaking. The dog, sensing his distress, lowered its head and gently nuzzled him, offering quiet reassurance. Chloe knelt beside them, brushing a stray lock of hair from Timothy's forehead. "You're doing great, kid," she murmured. "Just a little longer, okay?" The boy sniffled but nodded. The next few minutes felt like hours, but when flashing red and blue lights finally illuminated the alley, Chloe felt the smallest wave of relief. She lifted Timothy into her arms as backup arrived. Officers immediately spread out, securing the area while a paramedic rushed forward. "Any injuries?" the medic asked, scanning Timothy. "Just shaken up," Chloe replied. The medic gave her a nod. "We'll take it from here." As Timothy was placed into the back of the ambulance, Duke hopped up beside him, refusing to leave his side. Chloe turned to the officers. "Lock this area down, find out where that car went, and check every security camera within a 5-block radius. Someone's watching us, and I want to know who." She climbed into the ambulance, sitting across from Timothy and Duke. The boy's fingers curled into the dog's fur as his breathing slowly evened out. For the first time since she found him, he wasn't shaking anymore. Chloe met his eyes. "We're going to figure this out, Timothy. I promise." The hospital walls seemed to close in as Detective Chloe Moore processed what she had just heard. The kidnappers weren't just random criminals. They were professionals, former intelligence operatives, and someone powerful had erased their tracks. Chloe clenched her fists, her mind racing through every possible angle. What was so important about Timothy Wright? Why had they gone to such lengths to take him? And more importantly, who were they still afraid of? She turned sharply and headed toward the hospital room where Timothy and his mother Olivia were resting under heavy guard. But before she reached the door, Duke's ears perked up, his stance stiffening. He sensed something, and then a nurse rushed toward her out of breath. "Detective, you need to come with me. Now!" Chloe frowned. "What is it?" The nurse hesitated. "There's someone asking for Timothy." Chloe's entire body tensed. "Who?" The nurse swallowed hard. "His biological mother." The words hit Chloe like a punch to the chest. Chloe stepped into a private waiting room, where a woman sat anxiously in a chair. She had long auburn hair, sharp cheekbones, and tired eyes that held years of unspoken pain. She looked familiar, but Chloe couldn't place her until she introduced herself. "My name is Madeline Wright. I'm Timothy's mother." The room fell silent. Chloe exhaled slowly. "That's not possible. Olivia Wright is Timothy's mother." Madeline flinched at the name. "Olivia raised him, but she's not his birth mother." Chloe's mind reeled. Olivia had never mentioned anything about adoption. Had she known? Had she lied? Or had she been kept in the dark as well? Madeline's hands trembled. "I need to see him, please." Chloe studied her carefully. "Where have you been all this time?" Madeline's gaze dropped to the floor. "Hiding. From what?" She inhaled sharply. "From the same people who just tried to take him." Chloe's breath caught. "I used to work with Nathan Evans," Madeline continued, voice strained. "We were both researchers for a classified project, something bigger than we ever realized. When Nathan tried to leave, Her voice cracked. "They killed him, and I knew I was next." Chloe's chest tightened. "So you ran?" Madeline nodded. "I had no choice, but I knew they would never stop looking for me, so I did the hardest thing I've ever done." She looked up, her eyes filled with anguish. "I gave up my son." Chloe remained silent, absorbing the weight of the confession. "I thought he'd be safe with Olivia, that she could give him a life where he wasn't constantly being hunted." Madeline exhaled shakily. "But they found him anyway." Chloe's grip on the chair tightened. Everything was starting to make sense. Timothy wasn't just a random target. He was the last remaining link to whatever Nathan had uncovered. And now, his birth mother had come out of hiding, which meant, sooner or later, their enemies would come too. After intense deliberation, Chloe finally led Madeline to Timothy's hospital room. The moment Madeline saw him, her breath hitched. Timothy was curled up next to Duke, his tiny fingers tangled in the dog's fur, his face still pale from the trauma of the past few days. Madeline's hands shook as she took a hesitant step forward. "Timothy?" she whispered. The boy stirred, blinking up at her. Confusion flickered across his face. "Who?" His voice was hoarse. Madeline knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "It's me, sweetheart, Her words caught in her throat. "I'm your mother." Timothy frowned, his small body tensing. "But my mom is Olivia." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. "She is. She's been an amazing mother to you, but a long time ago. I had to leave, and I've missed you every single day." Timothy didn't move. He didn't cry. He just stared. Chloe watched the scene carefully, feeling the weight of the moment. Timothy was young, but he wasn't naive. He had spent the last few days running, hiding, fearing for his life, and now his entire world had shifted again. After a long silence, Timothy finally spoke. "Are you going to leave again?" Madeline sucked in a sharp breath. Chloe's heart ached at the rawness of the question. Timothy didn't care about DNA. He cared about who was going to stay. Madeline reached for his hand, but hesitated. "Not if you don't want me to." Timothy glanced at Duke, then at Chloe, then, finally, at Olivia, who stood frozen in the doorway. The two women locked eyes, and in that moment, Chloe saw the silent understanding between them. Olivia had raised him, protected him, loved him. But Madeline had sacrificed everything for him, and now they both had to find a way forward, together. As the night wore on, Chloe remained by the window, staring out at the city. Madeline's return had changed everything. Timothy had a family that cared about him, but he was still a target. And now that his mother had resurfaced, the people after him would be coming back. Stronger, smarter, more desperate. Chloe turned to Duke, who sat alert by the door. "We need to end this, boy," she murmured, running a hand over his head. Duke let out a quiet, determined growl. Chloe exhaled. She had always been a detective, a protector. But now, she was part of this family too, and she would burn down the entire operation before she let anyone take that away. The dim glow of the hospital hallway flickered above as Detective Chloe Moore pressed her knee into the suspect's back, securing the handcuffs around his wrists. Duke, ever vigilant, stood over him, baring his teeth in a low growl, as if daring the man to make another move. The suspect shifted slightly beneath her grip, a smirk creeping onto his face despite his failed escape. "You're wasting your time, Detective," he murmured. "You've barely scratched the surface." Chloe's jaw tightened. She knew bluffing when she saw it. But this wasn't just a bluff. This was a warning. Before she could press him for more, footsteps thundered down the hall. Officers rushed in, weapons drawn. "Take him to holding," Chloe ordered, stepping back as two officers hoisted the man onto his feet. "Lock him down tight. I want surveillance on him 24/7. As the suspect was led away, Chloe turned to find Timothy standing in the doorway of his hospital room, his small frame illuminated by the sterile light inside. He clutched Duke's harness, eyes wide with unspoken fear. "Is it over?" he asked softly. Chloe's heart clenched. How could she tell him the truth? That this was just the beginning? She forced a reassuring smile, crouching down to his level. "We're making sure you and your mom stay safe. That's what matters right now." Timothy nodded, but his grip on Duke tightened. Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a message from the precinct. "Suspect refuses to talk, but we pulled something off him. You need to see this." Back at the precinct, Chloe entered the evidence room, where her captain and the lead investigator stood around a table. In the center sat a burner phone and a folded piece of paper, items found in the suspect's pocket. "Check this out," the lead investigator said, handing Chloe the note. She unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were three simple words: Bayview Storage -312. Chloe's pulse quickened. This was an address, a location. The captain exhaled sharply. We cross-referenced it. It's a private storage facility on the outskirts of the city. No registered owners. Payments made in cash. If there are answers, they're there. Chloe nodded, already forming a plan in her head. If this was where the kidnappers had been operating from, it could lead her straight to whoever orchestrated the entire thing. I'm going in, she said. Her captain hesitated. You should wait for a warrant. There's no time, Chloe countered. They've already made one attempt to take Timothy back. If this place holds the key to why they want him, I need to get there before they clean it out. The captain sighed, but eventually nodded. Fine, but take backup and take the dog. Chloe smirked. I wouldn't go without him. By the time Chloe and her team arrived at Bayview Storage, the industrial district was eerily quiet. The facility loomed ahead, a stretch of metal doors and faded numbers covered in rust. Duke sniffed the air, ears twitching. He could sense something was off. Chloe moved cautiously, hand resting on her holstered weapon as she approached Unit 312. The steel door was locked, but not for long. With a swift motion, the lock was cut, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with crates, papers, and, most importantly, computers still running. Chloe stepped inside, scanning the walls, maps of the city, photos of Timothy, a timeline of movements. Her stomach churned. They were watching him for weeks, she muttered. Then, Duke growled. Chloe spun just as a figure burst from the shadows, knocking a stack of crates over in an attempt to flee. Stop! Chloe yelled, sprinting after him. The suspect darted toward the back exit, but Duke was faster. The highly trained service dog lunged, gripping the man's sleeve and yanking him down. Chloe closed the distance, gun drawn. Don't move! The man stilled. His breathing was ragged, his eyes darting to the scattered papers on the ground. Chloe followed his gaze. Among the documents was a ledger, one with Nathan Evans' name circled in red ink. Her blood ran cold. Nathan, Timothy's father. This wasn't just about a child kidnapping. This was connected to something much bigger. She looked down at the suspect, narrowing her eyes. What do you want with Nathan Evans? The man smirked. Not him. He nodded toward the wall of surveillance photos. We want what he left behind. Chloe's grip on her gun tightened. This wasn't just about Nathan. It was about Olivia and Timothy. Whatever secrets Nathan had kept from his family. They were worth killing for. And if she didn't stop them now, the people she had sworn to protect would never be safe. Chloe turned to her team. Secure everything. Bag the documents. This isn't just another case. This is war. And she had just stepped into the center of it. The cold, fluorescent lights of Bayview Storage cast eerie shadows over the evidence Chloe had just uncovered. Her fingers hovered over the ledger, with Nathan Evans' name circled in red, her mind racing. Whatever secrets he had tried to bury had just resurfaced, and now, they weren't just after him. They were after his family. Across the room, the captured suspect sat against a rusted metal crate, hands zip-tied behind his back. His lip was split, and his dark eyes gleamed with something unsettling, not fear, but confidence. You think you've won something, don't you? He sneered. You think this ends with me? Chloe crouched in front of him, her voice calm but sharp. But you're going to tell me who it does end with. The man chuckled, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. The clock's already ticking, detective. A chill ran down Chloe's spine. Just then, Duke let out a low, warning growl, his trained instincts sensing something before she did. Then, a deafening boom. The explosion ripped through the far end of the storage unit, sending crates flying and shaking the floor beneath them. Chloe barely had time to react before a burst of smoke filled the air, blurring her vision. "Move, move!" she shouted, dragging the suspect up and shoving him toward her team. "Get him out of here!" Duke barked wildly, lunging toward the door just as gunfire erupted from outside. They were here. The people who had been watching, the ones who had sent that sedan after Timothy. They weren't waiting anymore. They were cleaning up. Chloe grabbed the ledger, tucking it inside her jacket as she pulled her weapon. She had fought through worse, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for the case. She was fighting for a child, for a mother, for a truth that someone was willing to burn the city down to erase. The firefight outside was ruthless. Bullets tore through metal, ricocheting off the storage containers as Chloe and her team pushed toward the exit. The air was thick with smoke, alarms blaring in the distance. "Stay low," she ordered, leading her team through the maze of industrial corridors. But Duke suddenly halted, sniffing the air. Chloe turned just in time to see the dog's body stiffen. Something was wrong. Then she heard it. A child's cry. Her stomach dropped. Timothy. She turned to her team. "Get this guy back to the precinct now!" But Chloe didn't wait for an argument. She ran. Through the smoke, through the debris, her mind screaming at her to move faster. If they had Timothy, if they had gotten to him, she burst through the exit just as a black SUV peeled away from the hospital entrance. And through the tinted glass, she saw him. Timothy. His face was pressed against the window, eyes wide in terror. Chloe didn't think. She acted. She launched herself into the driver's seat of a patrol car, tires screeching against the pavement as she tore after the SUV. Duke leapt into the passenger seat beside her, ears pinned back, body tense. The chase was on. The SUV weaved through the city streets, dodging traffic, running red lights. Chloe's grip tightened around the steering wheel. "They're not getting away," she muttered. Duke barked sharply as if in agreement. She slammed the gas pedal, closing the distance between them. Sirens roared behind her as backup units raced to catch up, but Chloe knew she couldn't wait. If that car disappeared, Timothy would disappear with it. Ahead, the SUV made a sharp turn onto an unfinished bridge, one that led straight to the docks. Chloe gritted her teeth. They were headed toward open water. They weren't just kidnapping Timothy. They were planning to vanish. She grabbed her radio. "Block off the bridge. Cut them off before they reach the end." The SUV sped up, but so did she. Just before the car could reach the other side, a police barricade appeared, a wall of flashing lights and armed officers blocking their path. The SUV skidded violently, its tires screeching against the pavement as it swerved, straight toward the edge of the bridge. Chloe's breath caught. If they went over, she didn't let them. At the last second, she slammed into their rear bumper, sending the SUV spinning out of control. The car screeched, wobbled, then came to a stop just inches from the ledge. For a moment, silence. Then, the doors burst open. The kidnappers scrambled out, weapons drawn. Chloe didn't hesitate. She dove behind her door, returning fire, her movements sharp and precise. Duke launched forward, expertly disarming one of them with a powerful tackle. The others tried to retreat, but Chloe wasn't about to let that happen. Not this time. She closed the distance, delivering a swift blow to the nearest attacker, sending them sprawling to the ground. Then, a final gunshot rang out. Chloe turned to see the last kidnapper collapse, clutching his shoulder, and standing behind him, gripping a discarded baton with shaking hands, was Olivia, the mother who had spent days in fear, the mother who was done running. Chloe met her eyes. No words were needed. This was over. Officers swarmed in, detaining the kidnappers as Chloe sprinted toward the SUV. She flung the back door open, and there he was, Timothy. His small frame trembled, but when he saw Duke, his face broke into a sob. Chloe scooped him up, holding him close. "You're safe now, buddy." Duke nuzzled against the boy, tail wagging gently. For the first time in days, Timothy smiled. Chloe exhaled. the weight of the chase finally settling in. But she knew. The real fight wasn't over. She still had to find the person who had ordered this, and she wouldn't stop until she did. The night air was thick with salt and gasoline as Detective Chloe Moore stood near the wrecked black SUV, her pulse still racing. The flashing police lights painted the dock in streaks of red and blue, their reflections dancing across the dark waters. In her arms, Timothy Wright clung tightly to her, his small fingers twisted in her jacket as though afraid she might disappear. Duke, ever loyal, stood beside them, his sharp eyes scanning the scene, ready to protect at any sign of danger. It should have felt like victory. The kidnappers were in cuffs. Timothy was safe. His mother, Olivia, was only steps away, wiping away silent tears of relief. But Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. She had spent years trusting her instincts. They had never failed her before. And now, they screamed that this was not the end. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before answering, eyes flicking to where officers loaded the kidnappers into squad cars. One of them locked eyes with her, lips curling into a knowing smirk. Something about it sent a chill down her spine. She pressed the phone to her ear. Moore. A familiar voice crackled through the line. Detective, we have a problem. The man you arrested, he's not talking, but we ran his prints, and you're not going to like what we found. Chloe's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me. The officer hesitated. He's former intelligence. Chloe's stomach dropped. The world around her blurred for a moment, the sound of waves lapping against the dock fading into a distant hum. Ex-intelligence. This wasn't just a kidnapping ring, it was something bigger, something connected to the government. And if that were true, then whoever was behind this wasn't just a criminal. They were powerful. They had resources. And they weren't finished. She turned sharply, scanning the officers near the squad cars. The lead suspect, the one who had smirked at her just moments ago, was already gone, being escorted into a transport van. She barely caught a glimpse of his face before the doors slammed shut, but she could have sworn. He was smiling. Chloe didn't waste time. She marched toward the transport van, her boots echoing against the pavement. Before the officers could pull away, she yanked open the door. The suspect leaned back, completely at ease, his wrists cuffed, his face bruised from their earlier fight. You knew this would happen, Chloe said coldly. He shrugged. We all play our parts, detective. Her patience thinned. Who are you working for? A slow grin spread across his lips. You already know, don't you? Chloe's mind raced through every piece of the puzzle. Nathan Evans's ledger. The careful surveillance of Olivia and Timothy. The trained precision of the men involved. This wasn't about ransom. This was about control, about eliminating loose ends. And whatever Nathan had hidden, it was still out there. The suspect chuckled, seeing her realization dawn. Then, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think saving the boy is enough? He tilted his head. You haven't even found the real threat yet? Chloe felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Her radio crackled before she could respond. Detective Moore, you need to see this. There's been an incident at the precinct. She snapped her attention back to the suspect, but his smirk only widened. I told you, he murmured. The clock is already ticking. A pit of dread formed in Chloe's stomach. Something bigger was coming, and she had just run out of time. Back at the precinct, the moment Chloe stepped through the doors, she knew something was wrong. Officers moved frantically, voices raised in confusion. The security feed flickered on the monitors, some of them cutting to static. Then she saw it. The holding cells were empty. Where are the suspects? She demanded, her voice sharp. Her captain turned to her, his face grim. They're gone. Chloe felt the ground shift beneath her. Gone? She repeated, barely believing it. He exhaled. An anonymous federal order came through. Said they were transferring them to a classified facility. We had no say in it. Chloe's hands curled into fists. Federal? This went higher than she had thought. She turned away, her thoughts spiraling. Someone had pulled strings to clean up the mess. And that meant they weren't just after Nathan's secrets anymore. They were watching her too. She felt a nudge at her side. Duke. The dog pressed against her leg, sensing her tension, his deep brown eyes unwavering. Chloe let out a slow breath, steadying herself. Fine. They wanted to play games. She wasn't backing down. She had a mother and child to protect, and now she had an enemy in the shadows. But if they thought she was going to just walk away, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Detective Chloe Moore stood in the dimly lit precinct, her jaw clenched as she stared at the empty holding cells. The air around her buzzed with tension. Officers moved hurriedly, their hushed conversations filled with confusion and frustration. But Chloe wasn't confused. She was furious. The suspects, the very people who had orchestrated Timothy's kidnapping, attacked the hospital, and nearly killed them at the docks, had vanished. Someone had pulled the strings to erase them. And that meant this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a cover-up. A deep growl rumbled at her side. Duke, sensing her tension, stood rigid. His sharp eyes locked onto the monitors, flashing static. He knew what she knew. They were running out of time. A voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Detective Moore!" Her captain's voice was steady but grim. "We need to talk. Now!" She followed him into his office, where he shut the door and folded his arms. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Chloe." She scoffed. "I saved a child from a network of highly trained operatives. Forgive me for doing my job." Her captain sighed. "I mean it. Whoever these people are, they have resources, power. They just overruled us at a federal level. That doesn't happen without serious connections." Chloe crossed her arms. "And we're supposed to let it go?" His eyes darkened. "I'm saying you need to be careful." Chloe exhaled, forcing herself to stay calm. She had spent her entire career chasing criminals, fighting corruption. But this was different. This was personal. She turned on her heel. "Then let's find out exactly who we're dealing with." Her captain called after her, "Chloe, don't do anything reckless." But she was already gone. Back at her desk, Chloe powered on her laptop and plugged in the encrypted ledger they had recovered from Bayview storage. If Nathan Evans had been keeping secrets, then somewhere inside this mess of numbers, codes, and hidden accounts, there was an answer. Beside her, Duke sat patiently, his ears twitching as if he, too, could feel the weight of the moment. Hours passed as Chloe worked, cross-referencing the entries, connecting dots where others might have seen chaos. And then, she found it. A series of transactions, all leading to one location. A private estate just outside the city. Her breath caught as she zoomed in on the details. This wasn't just any estate. It was owned by someone with a name she recognized. Nathan Evans' former business partner, and Olivia's old boss. Olivia had told her that Nathan never spoke about his work before his disappearance, that she didn't know who he had been involved with. But was that the truth? Or had she been keeping secrets of her own? A part of Chloe wanted to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, but she had learned the hard way that trusting the wrong person could cost lives. And right now, the only thing that mattered was protecting Timothy. She grabbed her keys and turned to Duke. "Come on, boy, we're paying Olivia a visit." Chloe pulled up outside Olivia Evans's temporary safe house, her mind racing. Was Olivia in danger? Or worse, was she part of this? She didn't want to believe it, but after everything, nothing was off the table. She knocked firmly. A few seconds later, Olivia cracked open the door. The relief on her face when she saw Chloe was genuine, or at least it looked that way. "Detective," Olivia exhaled, stepping back to let her in. "Is something wrong?" Chloe studied her carefully. Timothy sat on the couch, flipping through a children's book, unaware of the storm brewing in the room. She kept her voice level. "We need to talk." Olivia's brow furrowed. "Of course." Chloe pulled out her phone and placed it on the table, screen glowing with the address from the ledger. "Does this mean anything to you?" Olivia's face went pale, and that's when Chloe knew. She knew. "You lied to me," Chloe said, her voice quiet but sharp. Olivia shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, I didn't. I swear, I don't." Chloe leaned in. "Then why do you look like you just saw a ghost?" Olivia's lips parted, but no words came. From the corner of the room, Duke let out a low, warning growl. Then, the lights cut out. The entire house plunged into darkness. And suddenly, Chloe's instincts screamed. "Get down!" she shouted, lunging toward Olivia and Timothy just as a window shattered. Gunfire ripped through the air. Duke barked wildly, launching toward the unseen attackers. Chloe grabbed Timothy, shielding him with her body as she reached for her weapon. "We have to move!" she yelled. Olivia, trembling, clutched Timothy as Chloe pushed them toward the back exit. Then, a voice echoed from outside, a voice Chloe recognized, a voice that made her blood run cold. "Detective Moore, you should have stayed out of this." Chloe's breath caught. It was the man from the docks, the man who had escaped, and he had just found them. She turned to Olivia. "Do exactly as I say. No hesitations, no mistakes." Olivia nodded, clutching Timothy tighter. Chloe's eyes flickered to Duke, his entire body coiled, ready to strike. They weren't running anymore. This time they were fighting back. The gunfire had stopped. The echoes of chaos had faded into the night, leaving behind only the sound of labored breathing and the distant wail of sirens. The safe house was in ruins, glass shattered, walls scarred by bullets. But inside, 3 hearts still beat. Chloe Moore lowered her weapon, her pulse still hammering in her ears. Duke stood at her side, his fur bristling, eyes locked on the now subdued attackers. The dog had fought with unwavering loyalty, standing between danger and the ones he swore to protect. And at the center of it all, Olivia Evans clutched Timothy, shielding him even as fear had threatened to consume her. Chloe knelt beside them, placing a steady hand on Olivia's shoulder. "It's over." The words felt hollow, because she knew the fight wasn't truly over, not for Olivia, not for Timothy, and certainly not for herself. The people behind this conspiracy would keep running, keep hiding. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight they had survived together. Timothy lifted his head, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Are we safe now?" Chloe met his gaze, her expression soft but honest. "You're safer than you were yesterday, and tomorrow you'll be safer than today, because we're not going to stop fighting for you." The boy exhaled shakily, then did something Chloe hadn't expected. He reached out and hugged her. Small arms wrapped around her neck, holding on tight, as if he finally believed he wasn't alone anymore. And in that moment, Chloe felt something shift deep inside her. This case had started as a mission, to protect an innocent child and his mother. But it had become so much more. It was about resilience, about love, about how, in the face of unimaginable fear, people could still choose to fight, to stand together, to protect one another. She looked at Olivia, who nodded, silent tears falling. A mother who had been afraid to fight had now become her child's fiercest protector. And Duke? The brave, loyal protector who had stood between danger and hope. He had never wavered, never doubted. Chloe smiled, rubbing Duke's head. Good boy. Because in the end, it wasn't just skill or strategy that won battles. It was courage. It was love. And that was something no enemy could ever erase. This story is about more than just crime, danger, or conspiracies. It is about unbreakable bonds of love, the sacrifices we make for the ones we cherish, and the courage it takes to stand against the darkness. Timothy, An innocent child caught in the storm of a hidden past represents the fragility of life and the resilience of the human spirit. Heel found safety not just in the protection of the law, but in the love of those who refused to abandon him. Olivia and Madeline Arone, who gave everything to keep Timothy safe, and one who risked everything to find him again. That what it means to be a mother, not just in blood, but in action, in devotion, in sacrifice. There's Chloe and Duke. To Duke, a loyal and highly trained service dog, symbolizes trust, bravery, and unconditional devotion, a silent protector who never hesitated to fight for his family. In the end, this is a story about facing fear with courage, confronting the past with honesty, and choosing love over indifference. Because in a world full of shadows, it is love, trust, and sacrifice that truly bring us to the light.